He was a billionaire CEO used to getting everything, but when a blind date rejected him, it wasn't anger that shook him. It was the quiet, unforgettable words of a waitress that pierced his guarded heart and changed everything. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to Ms. Love Stories channel, the place where love, drama, and unforgettable moments come alive. I'm so thrilled you're here, ready to dive into stories that will make your heart race, bring tears, and leave you believing in the power of love. Before we begin, I want to get to know all of you. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because in the next video, I'll give a special shout out to some of you amazing viewers from around the world. I can't wait to see how far our love story family reaches. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a single emotional journey. Get ready to feel, laugh, cry, and fall in love all over again. Because every story we share here is for you. Now, the story begins. Rose. The city lights flickered like distant stars across the glass towers of downtown, reflecting the life of a man who had everything. Or at least, that's what the world thought. McPherson, the billionaire CEO, sat alone at a sleek corner table in the dimly lit restaurant, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey in front of him. His tailored suit seemed sharper than the ache he felt in his chest, a hollow he couldn't fill with money, power, or endless business deals. Tonight was supposed to be different. A blind date arranged by an overeager assistant, but the rejection had come swiftly, mercilessly. He watched the laughter at nearby tables with a strange detachment, feeling the cold bite of loneliness in a place that usually celebrated wealth. His fingers drummed the table, restless, as he muttered under his breath, "Why does it feel like no one really sees me?" A few blocks away, the bell above the cafe door jingled softly, announcing Myra's arrival. She was carrying the weight of her own struggles, a single mother juggling 2 jobs, her dreams deferred but not forgotten. The smell of freshly baked bread and strong coffee greeted her like a small, familiar comfort. She tied her apron and glanced at the menu board with practiced precision, each movement smooth but purposeful. Myra had mastered the art of smiling through exhaustion, of hiding vulnerability behind a polite greeting. Her life had been a series of sacrifices, each decision carved from necessity. Yet beneath her calm, competent exterior lingered a quiet yearning. A hope that someone, somewhere, might see past the uniform and the bustling counters to the heart that still dared to dream. Pause here. If you've ever felt unseen despite giving your all, comment below and share your story. Let's talk about unexpected moments that change everything. Outside, a light drizzle began to streak the city streets, blurring the neon signs and puddles into shimmering mirrors. McPherson finally pushed back from the table, his mind restless. The rejection from earlier gnawed at him. Not just the embarrassment, but the shock that someone could dismiss him so easily. He wasn't used to being overlooked. He wandered aimlessly, the echo of his expensive shoes on wet pavement a lonely rhythm. The city's pulse, usually comforting, now felt alien. McPherson's gaze fell on a small cafe tucked between towering office buildings, its warm lights spilling onto the wet sidewalk. A fleeting impulse nudged him inside. Perhaps a coffee would settle his thoughts, or at least give him a few minutes of quiet. Inside, Myra noticed him the moment he entered. Not because of his sharp suit or polished demeanor, but because of the subtle weight he carried, an unmistakable loneliness she recognized all too well. She adjusted the tray in her hands, a small nervous habit, and offered him a gentle smile as he approached the counter. "Evening," she said, her voice soft but confident. "What can I get started for you?" McPherson paused, momentarily disarmed. Her presence felt different. Not flashy or intimidating, but quietly grounding. "Just a black coffee, please," he said, his voice betraying a hint of weariness he rarely showed in boardrooms or high-rise meetings. As Myra prepared his coffee, she glanced at him through the steam rising from the machine. Something about him intrigued her. The faint crease of pain in his brow, the tension in his jaw that spoke of battles fought in silence. Most people didn't notice those details, but she did. And something in her chest told her that, somehow, this stranger's story was about to collide with hers. The moment stretched, silent except for the soft hiss of the espresso machine, and the muffled rain against the windows. Neither spoke of the loneliness, the longing, the tiny fractures that defined their worlds. But it hung in the air between them, palpable. McPherson took a sip of the coffee, savoring the warmth that spread through his hands and chest. And then, as if guided by fate, Mira offered a single unassuming comment, almost incidental. "You look like someone who needs to hear something kind today." The words landed differently than either expected. A flicker of curiosity, and something heavier, something aching, stirred in his chest. He looked at her, truly looked, for the first time, and for the first time in weeks, the emptiness felt less permanent. If you've ever met someone whose words stayed with you long after, comment below. What did they say that changed how you felt? McPherson's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket, dragging him back to the world he'd tried to escape. A message from his assistant blinked across the screen. "Your date is here. Don't be late." He glanced toward the rain-slicked streets outside the cafe. He had tried to forget the appointment, to let the night dissolve quietly into solitude, but the pull of obligation, or maybe curiosity, dragged him to the restaurant. The air inside the venue was a blend of polished leather, faint perfume, and the subtle bite of expensive wine. He spotted her immediately, Cassandra, the woman he had been set up with. Her smile was rehearsed, her eyes bright with expectation. McPherson's chest tightened, not with excitement, but with the sudden realization that he had hoped, somewhere deep down, that she might surprise him. Instead, she surprised him all the same, but in the worst possible way. "You're not what I expected," she said, her voice smooth but tinged with polite judgment. The words struck like a cold gust, hollow and cutting. She leaned back, giving him the first and final chance to redeem himself. But no apology, no charm, no fortune could change the verdict. "I see," McPherson said, masking the shock with calm that felt brittle even to him. He had faced competitors, media storms, even public scandals, but nothing had pierced him quite like this. Her rejection was a mirror, reflecting back every insecurity he had buried beneath the suits and the money. Meanwhile, back at the cafe, Mira had noticed the subtle slump in his shoulders, the way his gaze lingered on nothing yet carried a storm of unspoken thoughts. Without thinking, she muttered to herself, almost a whisper, but loud enough for him to hear. Even someone with everything can feel empty inside. He turned sharply, startled, their eyes locking across the small space. The warmth of her voice, the calm sincerity, cut through the sting of Cassandra's dismissal like sunlight breaking a winter fog. For the first time tonight, he felt something other than rejection. Understanding, and an almost unbearable curiosity about this stranger who seemed to see him. The moment stretched between them. Outside, rain tapped a steady rhythm on the windows, almost like applause for the realization forming in his mind. The person who might understand him wasn't sitting across from him at the expensive table, laughing politely. It was here, in the soft cafe light, a world away from his expectations. He wanted to speak, to thank her, to ask why her words had struck so hard. But he stayed silent, letting the sensation wash over him. The shock, the warmth, the strange hope that maybe this rejection wasn't the end, but the beginning. Have you ever had one sentence from a stranger change how you felt inside? Comment your story. Sometimes words are more powerful than anything else. The following morning, McPherson woke in his penthouse overlooking the city, sunlight slicing through floor-to-ceiling windows like knives. The world outside carried on with indifferent perfection, but inside, he felt an echo of the previous night, a strange tug he couldn't name. He poured himself a drink, trying to drown the memory of her words, but the warmth of the coffee he'd sipped lingered like a whisper. He tried to reason it away. "She's just a stranger," he told himself. "A waitress with no idea who I really am." And yet, he kept seeing her face in his mind's eye, the tilt of her head, the quiet confidence in her gaze, the way she had spoken a truth he didn't know he needed to hear. For a man accustomed to control, this lack of control gnawed at him. Meetings, calls, contracts, they all blurred as his mind returned again and again to that fleeting moment in the cafe. He tried to bury her, but every distraction failed. Meanwhile, Myra's day unfolded in a blur of orders, steaming coffee, and the relentless rhythm of a cafe that never truly slept. She felt the residual weight of noticing him too, an unfamiliar awareness she couldn't explain. "Why do I care so much about a man I barely know?" she wondered, shaking her head as she wiped down tables with precise movements. She told herself it was nonsense, that billionaires lived in a different world, one she had no desire or right to enter. Yet every time she passed the window or glanced at the entrance, she half expected to see him standing there, coat dripping from the rain, staring back at her. She chastised herself silently. Stop imagining things. Just focus on the work, Mira. He's not your problem. Days passed, each weighted with the invisible tether connecting them. McPherson found excuses to linger near the cafe, circling it in his sleek black car as if proximity alone could somehow summon an answer. Yet pride held him back. He wouldn't be the man to chase a fleeting moment of curiosity. Not when rejection was a familiar, bitter companion. Mira, on her side, caught herself replaying the moment over and over. The strange intensity in his eyes, the vulnerability barely masked behind his perfect composure. She tried to brush it off, reminding herself of the walls she had carefully built around her heart. And yet, every encounter with another customer felt hollow, every conversation rehearsed, as if she were waiting for a phantom she didn't want to admit she longed for. It was in the smallest, quietest moments that the resistance bit deepest. McPherson would hear a laugh echoing from a passing cafe, and feel a pang of longing, only to scold himself for weakness. Mira would pause mid-motion, staring at the steam rising from a cup of coffee, wishing, though she wouldn't admit it, that he might walk through the door, and then chastise herself for indulging in fantasies. Neither of them spoke. Neither reached out. Pride, fear, and the cruel, invisible lines society drew between their worlds held them apart. And yet, in every glance, every fleeting thought, the memory of that first exchange, the rejection and the quiet words, pulled relentlessly at their hearts. By the end of the week, their internal struggles had become a quiet obsession. McPherson found himself noting the small rhythms of the cafe in his planner, imagining her hands, her smile, the way her presence seemed to anchor the storm inside him. Mira, in the late hours after the cafe emptied, would replay the echo of his voice saying nothing, yet somehow conveying everything, and wonder why it stirred her so profoundly. Both resisted the pull, yet neither could escape it. And as the city moved on in its indifferent rush, the invisible thread that tied them together tightened with every passing day. A tension neither could articulate, but both felt with painful clarity. The morning began with a storm that seemed to echo the restlessness both McPherson and Mira carried in their hearts. Rain lashed against the city streets, turning sidewalks into rivers of glimmering reflections. McPherson, wrapped in his sleek overcoat, had intended only to stop by the cafe for a quick coffee, but fate, as it often did, had other plans. As he entered, he was immediately aware that the usual morning rush was amplified by the storm. Customers shuffled in, umbrellas dripping water, voices overlapping in the warm, aromatic haze of roasted coffee beans. And there she was, Mira, brisk and professional, yet moving with the kind of fluid grace that made every hurried step look deliberate. Their eyes met before words could form. A small, almost imperceptible nod passed between them, acknowledgement of the unspoken tension. It wasn't casual, it wasn't polite, it was electric. Then came the moment that forced proximity in a way neither expected. A customer, slippery from the wet pavement, tripped and sent a tray crashing to the floor. Cups shattered, coffee spilled like dark rivers across the tile. Chaos erupted. Without thinking, McPherson was at her side, kneeling to help gather broken glass. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice low and urgent, cutting through the din. "I'm fine," Mira said quickly, brushing her wet hair from her face, but her hands shook as she tried to salvage the mess. "No," he said gently, grabbing a rag and pressing it into her hands. "I mean it. You could have been hurt." It was the first moment they touched without pretense. The first real acknowledgement of each other's presence as more than fleeting thoughts or curiosity. Mira felt her chest tighten, awareness sharpening with the slightest brush of his fingers. The manager's voice thundered from across the room. "We'll need to close for repairs. Storm's getting worse. Everyone out, or stay inside and help." There was no choice. McPherson and Mira were trapped in the cafe together. The storm raging outside, the broken cups and spilled coffee creating a shared crisis. For hours, they worked side by side, moving tables, cleaning puddles, soothing nervous customers who had sought refuge from the downpour. They spoke little at first, their words clipped and practical, but every glance carried unspoken tension. Mira noticed the tightness in his jaw when he moved a heavy table. McPherson saw the small twitch in her shoulder when she lifted a tray. Both were aware of the other in a way that made the minutes stretch longer, heavy with unacknowledged emotion. By late afternoon, the storm had turned the cafe into a small island in the city's flood. They finally paused, leaning against opposite counters, both soaked, both breathing hard from exertion. Mira laughed softly at the absurdity of the situation. "You know," she said, "it's rare to see a billionaire CEO getting elbow-deep in spilled coffee and broken china." McPherson allowed himself the smallest smile, a mixture of exasperation and something warmer. "And it's rare to see a waitress calm, collected, and utterly fearless in the middle of a disaster like this." Their eyes met longer this time. No words were needed. The storm outside, the chaos, the hours of forced collaboration, all of it had stripped away pretense. For the first time, they were simply two people confronting circumstance, learning each other in small, intimate ways. Hours passed, the storm finally ebbing, leaving the city glistening in puddles and rain-washed reflections. Neither wanted to leave, yet the world outside beckoned. They walked together to the door, side by side, awkward yet connected. The shared experience had shifted something fundamental. Resistance hadn't vanished. It never would completely. But for the first time, both felt the invisible thread pull tighter, binding them together beyond chance. As they parted at the street, McPherson hesitated, then said softly, "Thank you for noticing me. Truly." Mira looked up, her eyes wide, a small, knowing smile forming. "Maybe some people are just hard to miss," she replied, almost teasingly. And with that, they separated into the rain-soaked streets, hearts heavier, minds racing, and an unspoken promise lingering in the air. This was not over. Not by a long shot. The city streets were quiet now, washed clean by the storm, but McPherson's mind was far from still. He couldn't shake Mira from his thoughts. Her calm confidence, the way she had seen something in him no one else had. And stubborn as he was, he needed answers. Why did one sentence from a stranger shake me this deeply? He returned to the cafe the next evening, ostensibly to apologize for not lingering after the storm, but in truth, he was pulled by a deeper curiosity. He found Mira wiping tables, her expression softening as she noticed him standing awkwardly near the entrance. "Back so soon?" she asked, voice light but edged with curiosity. I realized I didn't thank you properly yesterday," he said, hands in pockets, gaze flicking to the floor. "For noticing me. For your words. They stayed with me." Mira paused, setting down the rag. Her eyes softened, but a shadow flickered there. "Noticing someone isn't always easy," she said quietly. "Especially when that someone has spent years learning not to be noticed at all." The words hung between them, unspoken pieces of their own histories waiting to surface. The cafe emptied around them, the hum of the espresso machine the only background noise. Mira motioned toward the back corner, where the light was softer. "If you want to understand, you should hear the full story," she said. McPherson nodded, leaning back against a counter, curious and cautious. Mira took a deep breath and began. She spoke of the years she had spent raising her younger brother after their parents died, of the sacrifices she had made to keep him safe and educated. Each word carried weight. The exhaustion in her voice wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She described the dreams she had shelved, the fleeting moments of joy traded for responsibility. And beneath it all, she carried a quiet fear. That love might never find her, that someone like him would never exist in her world. McPherson listened, the usual calm he carried cracking with every revelation. He thought of his own past, the relentless ambition, the father who had measured affection in performance, the loneliness that came with wealth and expectation. He realized that for all his success, he had never allowed anyone to truly see him. Myra's story struck a chord, her vulnerability reflecting the hidden pain he had buried. Hours passed, and the cafe seemed suspended in time. Finally, McPherson shared fragments of his own past. Childhood pressures, broken friendships, and the quiet ache of never being truly understood. He spoke haltingly, carefully, testing the waters of trust. Mira listened without interruption, her hand resting lightly on the table, her gaze steady. In that moment, the invisible barrier between them weakened. They weren't just a billionaire CEO and a hardworking waitress anymore. They were two wounded souls, each carrying burdens invisible to the rest of the world, meeting in a place that had suddenly become sacred. And yet, even as the bond deepened, the fragility of trust lingered. Neither had spoken of what came next. The storm outside had passed, but a different kind of storm brewed inside each of them, one of uncertainty, of hope, and of the unspoken question. Can someone like him and someone like me ever truly belong together? As McPherson rose to leave, Mira hesitated, then whispered, almost to herself, "Not everyone gets a second chance at being seen." He stopped at the door, glancing back. "Then maybe I'll make sure I don't waste it," he said softly, before stepping into the quiet city night, leaving Mira with a heart both heavy and strangely light. The following weekend brought with it a rare calm. The city buzzed quietly in the background, but inside the cafe, there was a space suspended from time itself, a little bubble where the world's expectations, chaos, and noise didn't reach. McPherson arrived early, slipping past the familiar hum of the espresso machine, the smell of roasted beans mingling with the faint aroma of vanilla and cinnamon. He spotted Mira arranging pastries with meticulous care, each movement precise yet gentle, and for a moment he simply watched. There was a grace in her motion, a quiet strength that went beyond her words. "Good morning," she greeted, her voice soft but brightening the space. "Coffee?" "Always," he said, smiling for the first time without hesitation. They began slowly, cautiously, sharing the small rituals of the cafe. McPherson fetching ingredients, helping restock supplies, Mira showing him the proper way to froth milk for cappuccinos. It was mundane, ordinary work. But through the ordinary, something extraordinary grew. Mira laughed when McPherson oversteamed the milk, ruining the foam in a cloud of creamy disaster. "You're trying too hard," she teased, shaking her head. "Coffee isn't a boardroom negotiation." McPherson chuckled, the sound rare and warm. "I'm used to precision," he admitted. "I suppose not everything needs spreadsheets and contracts." Her eyes softened. "Maybe not everything," she murmured, and for a moment neither spoke. As the morning unfolded, conversation turned toward stories, small glimpses of themselves, careful and selective, yet revealing enough to draw invisible lines between their hearts. Mira told him about the little joys she found in her day, a perfectly baked croissant, a smile from a child, the quiet satisfaction of work well done. McPherson shared fragments of his own life beyond the boardroom. His love for painting in solitude, the solace he found in old books, the strange comfort of jazz music playing late at night. And then there were the silences, soft, deliberate pauses where neither needed words. They drank coffee together in companionable quiet, hands brushing occasionally, sending small, unexpected jolts of warmth up their arms. In those silences, McPherson felt the weight he had carried for decades lift slightly, and Mira felt the small stirring of hope she had buried beneath her responsibilities. By afternoon, the cafe had quieted, and they found themselves lingering near the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. McPherson reached for the paper napkin she had been folding, tucking it gently into her hand. "You know," he said quietly, "I've never met anyone like you. You make everything seem easier somehow." Myra's breath caught. She looked down at the napkin, then up at him, her eyes glimmering. "Maybe we just noticed the same things," she whispered. The intimacy of the moment was electric, yet careful. Neither rushed forward, neither tried to force connection. They were exploring the terrain of trust, mapping each other's boundaries, learning the contours of hearts that had been guarded for far too long. Hours later, as the cafe prepared to close, McPherson helped Mira sweep the floor. Their hands met on the broom handle, lingering longer than necessary. She laughed softly, an easy sound that echoed in the empty room. "You're persistent," she said. "I've been called worse," he replied, smiling, but there was something tender in his voice, a quiet acknowledgement that he wasn't just helping her clean, but wanting to be near her, to share her space, to be a part of the life she had carved so meticulously. They finally stepped outside together as the sun broke through clouds, casting golden reflections on the wet streets. McPherson hesitated, then said softly, "I don't know what comes next," he admitted, "but I'd like to find out with you." Myra's heart swelled. She smiled, small and hesitant but real. Then maybe we start with coffee, she suggested. And so, they walked side by side, tentative but connected, hearts nudging closer. The invisible thread between them growing taut with possibility. For the first time, vulnerability felt safe, and hope felt like something tangible. The bond they formed that day was fragile, delicate, yet undeniable. It wasn't just shared laughter or small touches. It was the recognition of each other's wounds, the quiet courage to be seen, and the unspoken promise that perhaps together, they could begin to heal. Have you ever met someone who made your world feel lighter, even just for a moment? Comment below and tell us how it felt to be truly noticed. The week after their cafe bonding had been tentative but joyful. Each encounter, each shared laugh or glance, had slowly stitched together the fragile connection between McPherson and Mira. Yet even the strongest threads can be tested. It began with a phone call that McPherson hadn't expected. His assistant's tone was sharp, urgent, the kind that cut through his day like a guillotine. McPherson, the press has picked up a story about your cafe visits. They're calling it a billionaire romance scandal. Pictures have leaked online. He froze. The storm of words rattled through him. He had sought a quiet connection, a space away from the relentless gaze of the world. And now it was being dragged into the spotlight. Meanwhile, Mira was dealing with her own pressures. A regular customer, who had glimpsed the photos circulating on social media, leaned over the counter. Is it true? You're dating the CEO? Her tone was accusatory, laden with judgment. Whispers began to ripple through the cafe. Myra's face went pale. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the tray she was carrying. It's not like that, she said quietly, though doubt had already seeped in. Had she misread the signs? Was she nothing more than a curiosity in the life of a man used to getting everything? That evening, McPherson arrived at the cafe, determined to explain, to protect what they had built. But the damage had been done. Myra's eyes were cold, distant, walls he hadn't seen before rising in mere moments. I can't do this, she said sharply, her voice breaking slightly despite her attempt at composure. I thought you were different. But everyone has a price, and I can't be part of that world. McPherson's chest tightened painfully. He reached out, his hand hovering in the space between them, but she stepped back, shaking her head. Don't, she whispered. Just don't. He wanted to protest, to explain, to tell her that none of it mattered, that he had never cared for her because of money, social status, or the world's expectations. But the words caught in his throat. Pride, fear, and the weight of past rejection mingled with his heartbreak. For days neither spoke. McPherson returned to his penthouse, replaying every moment, every glance, every laugh, wondering if he had truly blown it. Mira, meanwhile, moved through the cafe mechanically, her heart aching with a mix of anger, hurt, and longing. She had allowed herself to hope, to imagine something real. And now, the world had intruded, shattering the fragile trust they had built. When he finally tried to call, her phone went unanswered. When he arrived at the cafe unexpectedly, she slipped past the back door before he could reach her. Even the briefest connection was denied, replaced by a chasm neither could cross without confronting their fears. One night, alone in his apartment, McPherson stared at the photos that had circulated online. They captured nothing of what had passed between him and Mira. The laughter, the vulnerability, the moments of pure human connection. And yet, the world had seen enough to drive a wedge between them. I'm not losing her, he muttered under his breath. But even he wasn't sure how to reclaim what had been fractured. Mira, in her tiny apartment, held a steaming cup of tea in trembling hands, staring at the rain-smeared window. She remembered his smile, the way he had seen her when no one else did. And yet, doubt gnawed at her, convincing her that vulnerability had been a mistake, that the world had already decided her worth. And it wasn't with him. The air between them had turned sharp and cold. Where once there had been warmth, laughter, and gentle touches, there was now silence, avoidance, and the echo of unspoken words. Both questioned themselves, McPherson whether he could ever break through the wall she had built, and Mira whether she had been foolish to trust, to hope, to allow someone into her carefully guarded life. Even though neither had fully left the other behind, the distance had become real. The thread that once connected them had been pulled taut, and now threatened to snap. The city was quiet that evening, the streets glistening under streetlights after a soft drizzle. McPherson stood on the balcony of his penthouse, hands clenched around the railing, staring at the skyline with a tension he couldn't shake. The world outside was alive and moving, but inside, time had slowed to a torturous crawl. He replayed every word, every gesture, every stolen glance with Mira. Her sharp rejection echoed in his mind, haunting him more than any business failure ever had. Pride whispered he should let her go, that she had misunderstood, that it wasn't his fault. But his heart, stubborn and relentless, refused to release her so easily. She's not a distraction. She's necessary, he realized, almost angrily at himself. Mira, on her side, sat in the dim glow of her living room, a half-finished sketch on her lap. Her fingers traced the pencil lines absently, but her mind wasn't on art. It was on him. The memory of his eyes, so open and vulnerable during their bonding, tore through the wall she had built. Her pride and fear whispered the same cautionary words. He belongs to another world. Don't reach out. Don't hope. Yet the truth she could no longer deny was that she had already hoped, that she had already let him see her as she truly was. The thought of never feeling that recognition again brought a pang sharper than any financial hardship or long day of labor. Hours passed. McPherson paced the penthouse, drafting a plan of what to say, how to explain, how to reach her without breaking the fragile balance between apology and assertion. The silence of the apartment pressed on him, demanding clarity he could not find. Mira, restless, wandered to the cafe in the dead of night. It was closed, lights dark, tables stacked in silence. She pressed her hand against the door, the cold metal a grounding sensation. Her heart ached, heavy with indecision. Could she let herself trust again? Could she let him in, despite the potential for disappointment? Fate intervened the next morning. The cafe doors swung open, and McPherson stepped inside, carrying neither pride nor pretense, only an honesty that had been absent in their previous encounters. Mira froze mid-motion, her hands stilling over a tray of pastries. "I know I can't undo what happened," he said quietly, voice steady despite the storm inside him. "But I also know I can't ignore what we have, what I feel." Mira swallowed, her throat tight. "And what if it's not enough?" she whispered, the fear and longing tangled in her voice. "Then I'll make it enough," he said softly, stepping closer. "I don't want to lose you because the world is noisy and judgmental. I want to prove to you that it's real." The words hung between them, trembling yet undeniable. Myra's chest heaved with both fear and desire. She could retreat, walk away, protect herself, cling to pride. But something in her told her that retreating now would be a betrayal to the connection they had fought so hard to nurture. She closed the distance, their hands brushing, then intertwining, tentative but deliberate. I don't know if I can trust easily," she admitted, voice shaking. "But I want to try with you." McPherson's lips curved into a gentle smile, relief softening his features. "That's all I need. One chance. That's all I'm asking." For the first time in days, perhaps weeks, the tension broke, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet acknowledgement of vulnerability. Both had chosen courage over pride, honesty over fear. They were standing at the precipice, but this time, neither was stepping back. The cafe, once a place of casual work and passing customers, had become the crucible of their emotions. Outside, the city moved as usual, oblivious to the intimate reckoning happening within those walls. Inside, two hearts beat in synchrony, fragile yet fierce, holding on to the possibility of love, connection, and redemption. Mira leaned slightly against him, a quiet, deliberate motion that spoke volumes. "One chance," she murmured, almost to herself, almost like a prayer. "One chance," McPherson echoed, pressing a gentle kiss to the back of her hand, sealing the choice that would shape both their lives. Have you ever had to choose between pride and vulnerability? Comment below what you would do in their shoes. Sometimes love demands the hardest choice. The morning sun filtered through the cafe windows, painting golden streaks across the wooden floor. The city outside hummed with life, but inside, time seemed slower, softer, and more deliberate. McPherson and Mira sat together at a small corner table, hands intertwined, coffee steaming gently between them. The world had tried to pull them apart. Rejection, misunderstandings, social pressures. But here they were, tethered not by circumstance, but by choice. Neither wealth, pride, nor past wounds held sway. They had stepped past fear, embracing vulnerability in a way that had seemed impossible only days ago. McPherson's gaze lingered on Mira, studying the subtle curve of her smile, the way her hair caught the sunlight. "I never thought I'd meet someone who could see me," he admitted softly. "The real me, not the billionaire, not the facade. But you saw me when no one else did." Mira squeezed his hand, her eyes glimmering. "And I never thought I'd meet someone who would take the time to see me," she said, voice trembling slightly. "The real me, behind all the work and the responsibilities." For a moment, silence filled the space, a shared recognition of everything they had endured to reach this point. The cafe was quiet, the hum of the espresso machine soft in the background. Yet it held more significance than any boardroom or gala ever could. A small tray of pastries arrived at their table, placed by a young barista who had been quietly observing their story unfold over the past few weeks. Mira smiled at the sight, a gentle warmth radiating from her. "Life feels lighter here," she murmured. "Like nothing else matters but this moment." McPherson nodded, eyes locking with hers. "Exactly. And I want more moments like this with you." They laughed softly, a sound unburdened, genuine, and light, echoing through the cafe. It was the first time in their lives that both could exhale, free from the weight of expectation and fear. Outside, the city moved on in its usual rhythm, unaware that two hearts had finally found one another. But inside, in the golden light and aroma of fresh coffee, McPherson and Mira existed in a world of their own making. He reached across the table, lifting her hand to his lips, a tender kiss that sealed their journey. Not just the journey of the past days, but of the wounds, the misunderstandings, and the courage it had taken to trust. Myra's eyes glistened, a mixture of laughter and tears, as she finally allowed herself to feel the full depth of connection she had longed for. "I think we're going to be okay," she whispered. McPherson smiled, relief and joy radiating from him. "More than okay. We're going to be incredible." The cafe bell jingled as a new customer entered, breaking the cocoon of their private world. Yet neither moved. For a while longer, they simply sat together, fingers intertwined, hearts aligned, savoring the fragile perfection of being seen, understood and loved. And as they shared another quiet sip of coffee, Mira repeated almost unconsciously a phrase that had once changed everything. "You look like someone who needs to hear something kind today." This time there was no shock, no hesitation. Only warmth, laughter, and love that had finally been given its chance to grow. Love often comes when least expected. If this story touched your heart, comment below. Who has spoken a sentence that changed your life? Don't forget to subscribe for more unexpected love stories, just like this one. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. Your time, your support, and your presence here mean more than words can say. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or kept you watching, please make sure to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a new upload. Until next time, stay blessed, stay strong, and keep believing in love. See you in the next story.